a party person. And
The ice skate. I remember her telling me she used to ice skate.
She did everything. I mean, she was really, I would say at this time, one of the livers or the jet set. My father was a singer who was in New York, and he was called to come to Detroit for the holidays to be in the choir. Well, it was Rabbi Mogilevsky in Detroit. I don't remember what shul at that particular time that he was called to, but that's how he came and met my mother through the holiday services while he was in Detroit. I think I don't know how they were introduced or whether he services or how they really came, but that's how he came to Detroit. And they say he was a singer, and he did after they were married. He did go to many of the synagogues and sing in their choirs. But I think that you're speaking more of the Lifchitz family than of my father's family, so I'd rather go back that way.
He had a beautiful voice, I remember that.
There are people on occasion, even now, who will come up to me and say, I still remember your father and his singing. He was well known. He was in Halevi concert, and well,
he sang with the choir chair set.
Yes, he sang, I'd say, with many choirs in the different synagogues.
Excuse me, I heard also, I don't remember from whom I heard this, but he also sang in the chorus at the Met at one time.
One time.
I don't know when.
I think at one time he picked up a spear, I think, in Aida. I think he was part of but yes. I do have at my home right now that music that was written by my father and by his brother while they were both singing, and I have it in my piano bench. My mother and father had a grocery store on Woodward near Trowbridge, and I do remember them getting up in the early morning to go to the market and do their buying, and they worked hard. Again, I try to keep my father's personality out of it and stay more on my mother's, but my mother did work with my father in the store.
You lived on Belmont.
I lived at
right around the corner from Oakland, where the grandparents
not really
lived. No?
Right around the corner,
That's how
but
I
it was 2
remember
blocks
it.
away. It was 247 Belmont, which was about 2 blocks away from where my grandfather lived.
All I remember, excuse me, about that house was that, because I think I was 5 when we moved.
Was it 2-flat?
Away. Yes, it was upstairs, and we had a porch the front, because when the weather was very, very hot, there was no air conditioning naturally. We used to all sleep out on the porch, I remember, or near the door, to the porch. That's the only thing I remember about that house.
Well, I remember more about the house than that, but I do not recall how. All right, now we're coming back to the Nickerman family. The Nickerman family was in the linen business, and somehow they asked my father to join them in the linen business. And my father did join the linen business. I don't know the little details of, maybe they needed money or whatever it was, but he did join the linen. And little by little, one partner was bought out, and another partner was bought out, and finally, Alex Nickerman, Larry's father, and my father were the 2 remaining partners, and they made it a very successful linen supply business. My mother and father had their 25th anniversary in March of 1943. It was Purim. Whatever Purim was, was the date. There was no real official date. It was Purim. And that was the day that my wife Shirley and I became engaged. And I do remember a big party downtown at the Statler Hotel. And my father had been ill and passed away in 1943.
August.
Yes, August of 1943. My mother did not, well, again, mother loved life, and she partook. I mean, she went down to Florida by herself, bought herself a condominium, and just enjoyed the winters down there. They would come back and forth. But she did remarry J. Miller, I was going to say 20 years later.
25, I think.
20 or 25 years after my father passed away. And that marriage lasted a few years when Jay died. He was a very fine man. Incident that I remember about that is that Jay Miller came up to my older brother and wanted to discuss or asked my older brother's permission to marry my mother. But he said, I don't know if I can keep your mother in the manner to which she's accustomed.
Oh, he could.
Well, it turns out he could have done that and done much, much more. My mother gave the impression of having everything in the world.
Yeah.
She was fairly well off, but she was not a wealthy woman. My father was a very quiet man, not an imposing person, but a very honorable, righteous, gentle, yes, absolutely. Where my mother was the life of the party, my father went along, but he was not.
Sometimes reluctantly.
Yes. My father would rather stay home and listen to some good music or read a book or read the Jewish Vorwitz or something of that nature than to go out partying. But he also enjoyed a good time. I mean, wasn't that he was just a loner or anything like that. Many friends.
And they shared a love of music.
Yes, my mother and father did share a love of music. I do remember one time, that time we lived on Glendale, and I don't know what I did wrong. I did many things wrong.
Which one?
You were a real devil, I
Yes,
understand.
I was a, yes.
Philly?
Yes.
Your mother didn't
I was
observe the precept of not
I was,
not
yes,
with spanking
She said it's
the
worth
child.
each tray. She disagreed.
I was a devil, there's no question about it. But I
Yeah,
know
I was-
that something happened that Friday evening, and at that time, the Detroit Symphony had Friday evening concerts at the Masonic, and I think Sunday evening concerts. And I think they were taped WJR. But my father was going to the concert that night, and I wanted to go, but I had done something, and the punishment was, no, now you can't go to the concert. I know, and I know that I threw a fit, an absolute fit. But music was part of our home.
Punishment stuck.
Yes, I think the punishment stuck.
Dad was strict.
Yes.
Very
Well,
much- he thought he was fair, but strict.
my father, and my recollection of my father has always been that he was a fair man, always tried to do what he would, very judicious.
Oh,
We
you
always
had a
court.
court. Oh,
We had a
I was
court.
just remembering the
And
court.
if we
Yes.
had any disputes with one another,
Yes.
we waited till my father came home and he would hold court, which was probably nightly in relation to my sister. Because my younger brother and I would take her apart, and if it weren't for my brother,
That's right.
older brother Benny, I don't think she'd be alive today.
That's right. That's what I was
And
told.
we would present the facts to my father, and he would dispense however he felt was just.
And
My mother was a terrible cook.
Oh,
Well,
Certain
yes, she
things,
was.
certain
Yes, she
things.
was. She would put things on the table that weren't edible.
just vegetables.
And then she would try to doctor them up by throwing some tomato soup in or something, and I couldn't eat it, and nobody would eat it. But one night she did make vegetable soup, and it was burned. There's no question about it. I can smell it even right now. And we started to eat it, and no one would eat it. And my father took my mother to task and sat her down and said, "Eat the soup. If you're going to present the soup, then you eat the soup." And that was the end of that. At that time, my Uncle Sam, I'm talking about the time that we lived on Glendale now. Uncle Sam was not married, and my mother would have my Uncle Sam over quite frequently. I don't remember whether it was weekly, once a month or whatever, but quite frequently. And my mother would prepare a meal that was fit for a king. I mean, and my father would say to my mother, "For your brother, you would do this." I don't know if you would do that for me, but for your brother, you would make this kind of a meal.
As Philly said, we were saying before that music was a great part of our family life, I think. And I remember at Hanukkah time, we had a whole choir. I mean, we didn't just say the brachas. My father, we sang the brachas, and we each had parts, and my father used to conduct us. Remember that?
Yes.
And it was beautiful, and I still remember it was...
Those at Purim and on Hanukkah, the Nickerman family, Forain,
I have a picture of it here.
goes back, there might be 200 people at those Hanukkah parties or Purim parties. That was the Lifchitz family, the Nickerman family, and their offshoots. I mean, and my father used to conduct the singing of the brachas, and he would also, they'd call upon him to sing some of the Jewish songs or operatic songs that he could sing.
Again, our connection to the Nickermans
Is through our grandmother.
I think the grandmother was a Nickerman, I
Yes,
think.
that's what I heard.
She was a
yes.
Nickerman.
She was a
Rita
Nickerman.
was a Nickerman.
And Tante Hoda married a Nickerman.
married a Nickerman,
Right.
so this was the overall,
Yeah.
the larger
Overall.
family. Yeah, we do have a,
Nickerman.
okay.
Tante and uncle, that's what we call them.
In the interest of time, I want to move on, but were there any other important things about Sadie or Hertz that,
Well, I mean, it's important, but only, let's say it's important to me, that after, the same thing was said also about my brother after he passed away, that people would come up to me and tell me that they had never known anyone who was as honest and straightforward as my father and my brother after he passed away. That a handshake was as good as anything, and he would live up to any promise or anything that if he said it, it was going to be, and that's the way it was. I mean, if he gave you his word, it was done. And to me, that's one of the things
And that's the way you are.
well, it's the way I
Okay.
felt about my father and my brother, and it's one of the things, a positive thing that was handed down, to me anyway, personally.
I would just like to say a couple things that I remember. As Philly said, one reason I'm here today was because of my brother Benny, because he always claimed that he saved me from Phil and Cindy always were in cahoots against me, and he saved me. And the story that I heard also, the first reason that I am here today is because my mother, after having had 3 boys, got pregnant the 4th time, although she always claimed she didn't know how. And she was going to do away with me.
oh, I didn't.
And as I remember the story,
That's
she
what
was
story my
literally
mother told
almost
me.
out the door when Aunt Ida said to her, she had an inkling of where my mother was going. And Aunt Ida said to her, "I had a dream last night that you were going to have a girl. And therefore, here I am."
I never heard that.
That was, yeah, my mother told me that
Yeah.
story,
Well,
yes.
That's a
Yeah.
true
Yes,
story.
I don't doubt it.
I believe that
don't
story,
doubt
too.
I
it.
believe it. I believe it.
And being the
We're all
only girl,
pro-lifers.
right? Being the only girl and the youngest to boot, I did get away with murder. I will say. Also, I just like to say that I always felt our house. My mother loved people. She loved life and she loved people. And I always felt that our house was always, I don't know, I would say like a center. I mean, for
Because
having
every
people
Friday
there.
night, especially,
Yeah,
we'd
we
be
had
there.
company a lot. The holidays, I remember a lot of the holidays taking place at our house with the whole family. And that included my father's family too, because
I'd like to move on to Ida.
Ida came to the United States when she was about 16. She didn't go to public school. She went to night school, and she got a job. She was working. She met Israel, I think, when they were living with Tanta, and Dad was staying with his relatives upstairs.
I think you're right.
And
yes,
I think
he
they
was
met
upstairs.
that way. Dad was
Right.
working for Cadillac Motor Company at the time. He came to this country. He had been a yeshiva student in Latvia, turned away from the yeshiva, turned away from religion, and became a Zionist, an ardent,
An
lifelong Zionist. And he was involved in Zionist activities at the same time he met Mother. Well, he was working at Cadillac Motor, and Mother tells this story. She would point to her little engagement ring, and it had a diamond about like this. She says, "See that diamond? That's worth $250,000. And of course, everybody, "Ah! What do you mean?" Well, Dad was working for Cadillac, and they didn't pay him in money. They paid him in bonds or stock.
Stop.
And when he became engaged, he had to buy his fiancée an engagement ring. So he took the $200 in stock, and his superintendent said, "Mr. Sendler, you're making a terrible mistake. Hold on to that money. Someday it's going to be worth something. Hold on to the stock." And he didn't listen, and instead he went out and he bought her this little diamond for $200. And we're still in the family today. We too would be driving whatever.
You know, I always thought it was General Motors that he was working
Well, it was
for.
Cadillac, and then they were
Division,
sort of,
General.
Oh, I
yes,
see,
yeah. Anyway, they too had a grocery. It may have been the same grocery that your parents had abdicated. I don't know, but
Well, I
Mother and
don't
Dad,
remember.
after they got
Yes.
married, had the grocery. And then a short time later, your father went into business in Flint, into the linen supply business, and unable to do the commuting, he sold the business to my father and to Uncle Moishe,
Which was my father's brother.
which was Uncle Hertz. We never called him anything other than Uncle Hertz because Tante Sadie called him Hertz. That was the only
We always
Mr.
called
Hertz.
him
That was
Mr.
the name
Hertz.
we
She
knew
called him Mr.
by.
Hertz?
Yes.
She used to call him Hertz.
And my father, whose name was Israel, was always known as Sir Labe. Yisrael Labe.
I never knew whether it was Uncle Abe or Uncle Labe.
Well, it was Sir
When I was
Labe.
young.
Yes.
Sir Labe.
Yes. And one person who was introduced to him as Sir Labe thought he was a
English,
an English knight. Yes.
Should have had Emma.
The association I had with your mom was the people said she was the angel.
Yes.
Did I make that up? That she was
Yeah,
the
she had a beautiful
really was.
disposition.
most wonderful
Had
person.
a-
But anyway, getting back,
of the brew.
when Dad moved her to Flint, when Dad went into business in Flint and moved her
Well,
away
she was
from,
You tell it
less
like it is.
affected of any of the brew.
Go ahead. Reed.
When you say the
moved
best, I mean,
Mother
she was
away from
just
her
nice, plain
father
nice.
and her siblings. It was the worst thing he could do. I mean, she was 60 miles away and practically distraught. She told how on Thursday she would take Frida out of school, and I was an infant little girl then, and she would put us on the interurban streetcar and come into Detroit Thursday. Dad would finish work on Saturday and drive in Saturday evening and take her back on Sunday. So she would only be in Flint Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and then she would come back. Eventually, she realized that Flint was her home and that she was going to have to be satisfied there. And not only did she make it a very positive experience, she became one of the leaders in the Jewish community in Flint. She and Dad organized the Zionist movement. They were involved in the Yiddish Cultural Club. Mother was president of the Sisterhood and of the Pioneer Women, and the whole nucleus, much of the nucleus of the Flint community revolved around our home. But let me say, after Mother was weaned away from Detroit for a little bit, we used to come in every Sunday. Every Sunday at 8 o'clock, Dad would say, "Hotz, du kommst?"
Which means
Look at us watch, which means It's
was
8
it.
o'clock and it's time to go.
No?
And she would have to get the kids dressed and she would have to clean up the house and she would have to pile us in the car. And at 8 o'clock we piled into the car and we always stopped at the Hertz's. That was our stopping place. And there was a very close, very warm relationship between the two families.
Yes, well, my brother and I used to come to visit her mother and father, I would say,
During Christmas vacation,
time.
yeah. They didn't have a suitcase.
That's
you-
correct.
yeah.
We used to take knickers, pair of knickers, and tie up the bottom, and then pack all of our belongings into the knickers, and then carry the knickers.
I remember that.
That's how we would travel. We didn't have suitcases.
And Dad and Uncle Moishe gave them a job in the linen supply company there. Why your father didn't
Well,
give
we
you
would
a
come
job
there for
on
Christmas and
vacation,
spend 10 days or how long it would be, and we would go to Independent Linen in Flint and fold towels for 10 cents
I
a
think
hundred.
he paid you more. I think they paid you more than your dad did.
Well, 10 cents a hundred or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but we did have a job there.
And I spent many a vacation. I remember I used to come to Flint, and my cousin Reva used to schlep me around all the time with her friends. She took me many.
And our
many
summers
times.
were also spent at Lake Orion. Very many happy memories. In fact, there's a picture there of about 100 people that were related to the Nickermans on a Sunday at Lake Orion. Now, what happened in our case was my father, being a very gregarious, outgoing, generous soul, would invite everyone he saw on the streets to come out to Lake Orion on Sunday. And then the family from Detroit would come out to Lake Orion on Sunday, and my mother would go in the kitchen at 6 o'clock on Sunday morning and start cooking, and at 10 o'clock Sunday night, she would crawl out of the kitchen. But we kids enjoyed it. We had very happy memories of Lake Orion.
What kind of mama was she?
I don't remember my mother ever raising her voice to us. She was very warm, very loving. I think she wrote the psychology books about.
No, I think she was just born with it.
Possibly, I'm sure. I don't know of anybody who has the temperament that she had. Nothing ever made her angry, and I don't remember her ever saying an unkind word about anybody.
No, I always tried to be like her, but never could. I never reached that height.
Was she a role model? Was she a
She
role
was.
model?
Absolutely.
A model for you?
Uh-huh. She was just so dear and charming and warm, considerate, everything that you would want to be. She was just a dear. I think she was everybody's favorite in the
Yes.
family.
I want to say something, and I think this applies to the whole family. If someone were asked to ask me to characterize the family, I think one of the things I would have to say is our sense of humor. Because I remember my mother was a great mimic, and she would not ape in an unpleasant sense, but she would adapt their tone of voice and their mannerisms. And I remember on many occasions she would just have us in stitches. For example, one of them was Bertha Sandler. You remember Bertha? Bertha spoke a certain way. Her daughter's name was Edith. Edith, I want to go to the movies. What movie do you want to see, Ma? I want to see such and such movie. But Ma, you already saw it. Tell me, Edith, did I like it? And this was the kind of story that my mother, and she would get Bertha Sandler down perfectly, and it would just be always a lot of fun. But she refused to believe that there was anything bad that could be said about anybody, especially her grandchildren. She was a lovely lady.
She was indeed.
Your father, there are so many stories about him, we won't be able to get to all of
we
them.
have to do a whole tape on my
It's mostly
dad.
on the family, but just two or three that really, as you folks see it, characterize
Dad
this amazing person.
Yes, Dad was a very well-read man, extremely well-read. His historical knowledge of the Bible, of literature, world history, everything. His mind was very, very quick, right up to the end. He was very astute.
And he was not a believer in terms of a religious believer, and
No.
yet he knew it cold. right?
Yes.
I mean, he was
He
the.
knew everything.
Yes.
Yes, he did.
Yes, he
was a
did.
cultural-
This was not an ignoramus. This
No
was someone who
way.
just
No
knew it and
way.
chose.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Yes, and I think his one solid belief in the Jewish people was that there be a state to keep them together. And I think probably the happiest moment in his life, I don't know about my mother's, but his especially, was when they set foot on the new state after they had worked all their married lives, and Dad even before that, for the establishment of the state. But Dad also was one of these people. He didn't care how his name got in the paper as long as it was spelled correctly. And another highlight in his life was when Shelley wrote a letter to the Michigan State Commission on Aging or whatever. They were having a contest to name the senior citizen of the year.
State Fair,
And-
Michigan State
well,
Fair.
the winner was to go to the state
Okay.
fair, and Shelley and I talked about it. And first she was going to name Bubby, and then she was going to name Sadie, and then we agreed that both of them should be named as the outstanding citizen. And then she went on to enumerate what each of them had done to deserve that honor. Well, they won the local honor, and then they went on and they won the state honors, and they were to have been given an award at the Michigan State
Oh,
Fair.
sure, I remember that.
Well, it was the hottest day of the century, I think. And my mother, who was very modest and very unassuming, preferred not to go. But had my dad not gone, I think his world would have collapsed. And so they went to the Michigan State Fair, and we have a picture of them accepting the award. And of course, this was his one of his very highest moments. Whenever anybody would come into our house, he would take them and show them the picture. This is
I think
The thing that I remember, which is small, but in relation, to the many things I remember about her father, was when we were young, and whenever we would greet him, it was always Shalom Aleichem.
Yes.
And he would give you a nickel or a dime, whatever small
Always
change that he,
yes.
when he would say that whenever he would come into town. That's very small, but he was a very happy, outgoing. I'm not even going to go into the intelligence part. He was absolutely superb.
I remember his last days when he was at Barman Hall. I came to see him one day, and he had a dreadful